the optimum performance out of that team and understanding how you can help them. And that's obviously a massive challenge of all sales leaders, some bigger than others. But what's your approach when you've been here 6 months, so you jump
Yeah.
in? What you first probably had to figure out, what's the lay of the land? Like, what are you working with, right?
If you're going in there and your client knows you're developing and you're trying and you're giving your effort, and you can make that client a mentor of yours,
That's
you just broke the code right there. And now you got your customer rooting for you to succeed.
That's a great way of looking at it. I hadn't thought about that. You're exactly right, particularly with a young salesperson.
Yep.
There's a question about that. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you think about it, the client knows. The clients, you're usually dealing with someone that's been in the industry 15, 20, 30 years. They know you don't know everything. So as long as you're authentic and you can generate that mentorship out of them, that's a huge win.
Hi, welcome to the Sales Elevation Podcast. My name is Ed Kerr, and I am pleased to have Diego Palacios as my guest today. Diego, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about you, and most importantly, where you are now. You're the VP of Building Automation National Sales at Harris Company.
Yep.
And for those who don't know Harris, because it's a big company, but not a huge company, but a pretty big company, that quiet giant, as you described it. So tell us a little bit about Harris.
Thanks. So Harris Company, I've been here with a little over 6 months now. And as you mentioned, doing national sales. So really, I would tell you Harris, as you said, is a large company, arguably one of the top, mechanical contractors. That's what we're mainly known for. And then we also have an entire conveyors division. So really specializing in that area. And then also building automation and a service division and security. So we're very building centric and manufacturing centric, which generates a lot of opportunities for us. And we're just on the growth pattern. So trying to grow and accelerate.
Nice. And you've got a team of roughly how many on your?
I think across North America, just in the building automation, security, and service side, we have roughly about 70 to 100 sellers.
Got it. Great.
Yeah.
And what's the typical makeup of that? Are they mostly veterans or are fairly new?
I would tell you, I would say it's probably almost an even split of half our veterans, and I would say like 3-year, 4-year veterans. We got some outliers that have longer tenure than that, but I would say the other half is probably a year or less in terms of being a Harris salesperson.
Got it. Okay, so that's an interesting challenge right there, right? It's a pretty good sized sales team of different levels of skill, different personality types, obviously. So as a leader, when your focus is on really getting the optimum performance out of that team and understanding how you can help them, and that's obviously a massive challenge of all sales leaders, some bigger than others. But what's your approach when you've been here 6 months, so you jump in? What you first probably had to figure out, what's the lay of the land? Like, what are you working with, right?
Yeah. I always live by the 30, 60, 90, start learning, testing, pushing, asking the questions. And in my background, I've been a sales leader for over a little over a decade now. I would say, the secret sauce is really getting everyone rowing in the same direction and working as a team and realizing a team effort is a great way to start an approach and getting in that mindset, a competitive mindset. Honestly, you want that hunger,
Yeah. Oh yeah. And have you been able to incorporate that while at the same time getting the leaders or the people that have been there a while that could really help out the new people? Have you been able to accomplish both of those? That's a tricky thing.
Yeah, it is tricky, and it doesn't happen overnight. So you got to set your expectation to be realistic. I would say there was already a culture there and just trying to amplify it even further. So I would say, yeah, we're getting there. We're unlocking. We've got a lot of, I would really tell you, we got a lot of technical people, and trying to unlock that sales hunger in the majority of the team has been a fun journey. So you could do, like, we're doing things like just having internal competitions or just having competitive games against one another in a team building atmosphere. So really honing into the culture, not making it like a cutthroat culture, but developing that culture in a positive way to get to the direction that we want to.
That's great. And when you say kind of rowing in the same direction, What does that mean to you? Does that mean that they're all clear on the same mission, or they understand how to consistently present your products or services in a differentiated but accurate fashion? Like, what does that mean to you?
So what that means to me is we're all on the same mission, which is growth, customer retention, and really just development. So are we developing ourselves? Are we growing as an organization? And are we retaining our customers and not forgetting, where our upbringing it really started with, how we got to
Mhm.
where we got to. So that to me has been the mission, because when you start thinking of a salesperson, everyone sells slightly different, and not
Mhm.
one style works for every client, and not one style is authentic for every salesperson out there.
Yep. Would you say that if you asked everybody on your team why Harris, just in a very general terms, would they all answer it similarly, or are there lots of different answers they could give? And does it matter?
Well, so I would say why Harris? To answer your question, I would say the majority of the people are answering around the same topic, and it's the people. I mean, when you start looking, if we wanted to get very technical, I mean, a product's a product. It's the people and the machine and the engine behind it. And
Hmm.
that's, it ties into Harris and our motto, we deliver certainty. So that is
Okay.
the one thing that, has been great. And that's really starts from a culture standpoint of there's nothing too hard or too difficult for us to overcome as long as we're
Yeah.
working as a team.
Got it. I love that. We deliver certainty.
Yeah.
When we talked earlier, you mentioned there's a difference between book smart and street smart.
Oh, yeah.
Can you share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so what I'm really getting at there is, and you sort of heard me talk about it, like we have a lot of technical folks as a great example. And some of them may have some of those street smarts. And what I call street smarts is probably like what everyone thinks like your stereotypical salesperson is. So, I think there's a good blend of how do you mix the two.
Mhm.
The ideal situation is you want someone to be technical enough to stand on their own 2 feet, but you want someone to be street smart to be able to read a scenario, identify like, hey, maybe this is the time I quiet up and listen to the customer, or let me understand or be social with that customer to develop a relationship. So that's really where the rubber hits the road in my mind of how do you build your ideal salesperson. Um,
Hmm.
so technical and street smart. So that social relationship aspect and the team effort.
Yep. Yeah. And when you have someone who's really more technical, is it easier for them to kind of acquire that capability in a social sense, or vice versa? What have you found? Because this has come up before actually on another podcast. And, sometimes it's hard for people to suffer that technical learning curve,
Yep.
but they're very, gregarious. But then it's, sometimes even harder for someone to become, more adept at building rapport and who's very sound technically. So I was curious if you've found that either way.
So I would say to answer that, at the core of it is pure honesty and reflection on that sales leader. If that sales leader, is, your stereotypical salesperson, it might be beneficial to have a little bit of the yin to the yang and have that technical person underneath so they can develop that sales. So I've
Yep.
always looked, you can approach it different ways. You could have, your sales leader be super technical or non-technical, and then how you build your team after that is you don't want to have too many of the same on one team,
Yeah.
because that just doesn't diversify you enough in terms of
Uh-huh.
skill set and mindset and how you triangulate a deal and how you look at things. I would also say, you could look at it in one sense of you want to build a salesperson to have all that skill set in one, or you could build a team that does a team approach where you have your technical guy or your technical person and you have your street person or your pure sales
Yep.
person, and they work together well. So you got your street person farming out, trying to farm and develop the deals. Now you're not doing now the technical person is coming in at the right time, the right moment to help really push things over the edge from a solution standpoint that the other salesperson had developed. So there's numerous ways to do that. So that's why I go back to it's a pure honesty of yourself, especially as a sales leader. am I a technical person or am I a great salesperson? What am I? And how do I
Mhm.
build the team around me?
And if you have the right culture, like it sounds like you certainly do, and they're willing to collaborate, when you have a highly technical account or one that really requires that sort of more of that expertise, I'm sure it's really helpful to sort of tag team and bring that technical person in. Uh,
100%.
yeah,
Zipper up an account, you
yeah.
sort of start matching level to level on that account, and it makes it tough to lose that account.
You mentioned earlier also that you've that like most sales leaders, you're constantly looking to level your team up. And
Yep.
the Sales Elevation podcast, it's all about
Yeah.
elevating their performance. So that's good for this episode. What areas have you identified where, and there's always obviously room for improvement in many areas, but if you had to sort of focus on a couple of areas of improvement for your team currently, what would those be? And how do you plan to achieve that?
So I would say, not specific to the teams here, but specific to most teams in general, it's the
Mhm.
hunger in the belly. Are
Okay.
you hungry enough to go get it? Most people, I always ask, like, why'd you get into sales? And I mean, the purest answer that we all know is money, right?
Hmm.
Or they love the hunt and the kill. Those are some of the purest answers. So I would really, highlight hunger and mindset is really the target to just overcome. Because if you can get the team hungry, you can get them in the right mindset to go grow and develop the business, whether that be to put money in their own pocket or to keep the company so busy that their ops team doesn't look anywhere else,
Yep.
because they have job security and they see the opportunity for growth and potential. I mean, those are all different things. And that goes back to the mission, right? If
Yep.
you have a hungry team, then they're on the same mission of let's go grow this thing. And that drive is what you're looking for.
And do you find yourself as a sales leader like a psychologist who's constantly looking to see where that individual might be purpose driven and trying to diagnose that yourself and speak to them as an individual in that regard? And then kind of you've got a whole assortment of individuals. I don't know if they can all adopt the whole a team purpose. Maybe they can, maybe some don't. But just about that. When you see somebody who maybe might not be as driven or might not have as much hunger in the belly, what do you typically, what do you do?
So I 100% believe in individualism. So
Mhm.
everyone operates, their mode of operations different. You got to understand the team you have. You got some players that love to work early in the morning. You got some that love working late at night. You got some with families, some without families. So understanding that really helps balance out how you're pushing and motivating your team. So
Mhm.
individualism is a really a key component. So the more you understand and spend time with your team, and spending time with your team can be going out on sales calls. Like, I mean, you should be doing that as a leader, auditing your team, being there so they know that you have their back and supporting them and help
Mhm.
coaching them on, on-site coaching. A lot of people have gotten away from that. I still truly believe rubbing elbows is really the key to growth. I mean, at the end of the day, people
Yep.
people buy from people and people work for people. So you got to have that people factor in there.
And when you're trying to assess when you have somebody on your team that may not be putting in the right effort, or maybe you look at their activity and the activity's there, but they're just not getting the results. And so maybe it's an approach, or it might even be some sort of attitude that they're not even aware of, where they're somewhat defeating themselves.
Yep.
Are you mostly, when you're making assessments about their effort, whether it's lack of effort or effort that's not translating, what are you looking at? Are you looking at the lagging indicators? And so, did they miss their number, or are you noticing things that are just habits or things that they're doing that maybe they're not, like you mentioned at one point, we had an earlier conversation, we mentioned about not getting out of the building. You got to, sometimes
Yep.
you got to shoo people out of the building, right?
Yep.
Throw them out of the nest, let them make them fly, right?
Yep. Yep. So
So
I,
what do you look for?
I would tell you, both leading and lagging indicators are a huge thing. And just, don't always assume. You might, like, I've come across where I've had salespeople that, they're having a tough personal time. Their personal life is defeating them and their game is off. But really, especially with young sellers, activity, just keeping on track. A lot of people use CRMs to sort of beat up on their team. And if you can use a CRM and change the perspective of like, hey, look, this is showing you this leading indicator of what your pipeline looks like, and your conversion rate is X. You don't have enough to get there. How do we work together? Like, are you doing everything? Do you need help from me? What does that look like? And that's where you
Mhm.
start really pushing it and sort of inviting yourself essentially on those ride-alongs with that salesperson. Because to your exact point, you could have someone that's missing. This is the street smart, right? This is where, all right, you might not be reading that this customer doesn't like you, or you might not be
Right.
reading that this customer's basically trying to hand you a PO and you just got to take it.
Hmm.
Um, or, hey, you're going out there and you're smelling desperate, like
Hmm.
stop this desperate plead. But you don't know that as a leader unless you're out there with your team. So
Yep.
really doing those audits and being out there and understanding each individual is really the key on how you focus and where you focus.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I would say that's sort of it in a nutshell from my perspective.
Do you all follow a certain sales methodology, or do you personally with in your previous companies, or is it
Yeah,
what, or is it a
yeah,
combination? I find that a lot of places it sort of seems to be an amalgamation of all these other various methodologies.
oh yeah, and you see me chuckle a little bit on this because I've been at different companies and everyone has their own sales methodology. So the answer your question, yes. And all of them are the same yet different. So
Hmm.
they might use different words, they might, have a different approach. And I love that because every new salesperson needs a framework to work with.
Yeah.
But what I truly believe in, and this was my upbringing, because when I first started in sales, I felt like I was the sixth man on the dream team coming in. Um,
Hmm.
and the way I think people should learn is not only from the basic framework, but shadowing other salespeople, other experienced or even inexperienced people. Because what you do is you see something in practice that you're not seeing yourself. So you can see, hey, this individual is so personable that they know their birth dates, they know the family, they know this. Or this
Yep.
individual has a technical approach and does lunch and learns up the wazoo. And the reason I point to following different people, and I always say, 3 to 5, follow 3 to 5 salespeople, because what you'll find is what you'll get to pick and choose a little bit, what works for you and what doesn't work for you.
Hmm.
How does that come off of me? Is that authentic or is that not? And that develops, a strategy as an individual starting out of like, let me figure myself out. Let me get in the skin, right? Maybe
Hmm.
lunch and learns, I'm not a good presenter, but let me work on that. Or maybe, I'm a great, I call it the mayor. You have the mayor of sales, like that
Yeah.
salesperson that can walk in and just greet everyone.
Uh-huh.
But the downside of a mayor is sometimes they struggle to convert. They know everyone, but they struggle to get that over the finish line. So like
Yep.
mixing and mashing those skill sets and talents helps an individual see what they might be good at or what they should try, or what, like that's not me. Like that's too used car salesy that I'm not
Uh-huh.
gonna do that. So that's why I love just like the interaction. Again,
Yeah.
figuring yourself out.
Yeah, and I talked to another sales leader not too long ago who felt like one of the most important things for sales people is to be authentic and authentic to themselves. And that authenticity comes through, and especially when it's coupled with someone who's genuinely curious about the needs of the
Yep.
customer, the problem they have, and seeking to really understand that in a way that you can be in service to it
Yep.
before you start trying to sell them anything. And
Yep.
that, if it's coming from an authentic place, I think the salesperson typically can become, a trusted confidant. And when you get there, I think that's where we'd all like to be in sales, is when we earn that trust. And, it's kind of hard to get a deal through without it, I think.
Heck, I would tell you, you don't even need to be a trusted confidant to your client. If you're going in there and your client knows you're developing and you're trying and you're giving your effort, and you can make that client a mentor of yours,
That's it.
you just broke the code right there. And now you
Uh-huh.
got your customer rooting for you to succeed.
That's a great way of looking at it. I hadn't thought about that. You're exactly right, particularly with young salesperson.
Yep.
That's the question about that. Yeah.
Yeah, because
Well,
I mean, if you think about it, the client knows. I mean, the clients, you're usually dealing with someone that's been in the industry 15, 20, 30 years. They know
mhm.
you don't know everything. So as long as you're authentic and you can generate that mentorship out of them, that's a huge win.
It really is, and I think they can all smell that inauthenticity. I mean,
Yes.
immediately. It's that kind of naivete of youth or someone who's new at something. You don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what you're putting off, and because you're just not wise enough, and you're not objective enough, right? So,
Yep.
um,
It's funny. I had a story working with this company when I was a young seller, Grafe Engineering, and I met the crusty old guy in the corner. And he started asking me a question about, chillers at the time. I answered question one, that opened up gate one, answered question two, gate two. And I got to question four, and I'm like, I don't know this. Pretty sure my boss does. So let me set up something else. And the irony of that is he appreciated my honesty right out there than
mhm.
rather trying to like woo saw him with an answer.
Uh,
He opened up his drawer and lo and behold, he was an author of like three different, energy plant books. And that led to me working with him and basically supporting him in his efforts on developing his next engineering article. So I was
that's
like, oh,
great.
wow. Like if I would have just woo-sawed him, sales that, I would have lost that opportunity and never had that at such a young age.
That's a great story that I'm sure you've shared with your team,
Oh
but
yeah.
particularly young people. And it's a wonderful baseline and fallback for someone to have where they don't need to know everything and they shouldn't try to, wordsmith somebody to death. They can
No.
just be themselves and honest. Well, that actually leads me to another question, which is we talked earlier about that critical distinction between a sales manager who's more sort of process focused and a sales leader who's more development focused. So before you answer,
Yep.
where would you put yourself? And I think I know the answer,
Yeah.
but and why does it matter? What's the better role for a sales leader in order to get high performing teams?
So I'll answer this. So I started as a sales manager. I did not turn into a sales leader overnight. So I believe myself as a sales leader. And the reason I believe that is one, touching back on the individualism on how I lead a team. Two, really rolling up your sleeves and like whether that be working with the people above you and managing up or working with your direct reports and managing down, always being trying to be the best as either an advocate for your team or helping your team understand why certain things. Not everything's going to
Mhm.
be rainbows and butterflies. Some things are tough things, pills to swallow, but helping them understand the reason behind it and how we got to this point. Like those different things, whether it be an internal struggle or a change, dealing with change management is always a tough thing. And really, the reason I feel like a sales leader is because people have just followed me. I left the company I was at, and now I'm at Harris, and I've gotten numerous phone calls of guys just wanting to come follow me and come work. They don't even care what it is. They're like, we just want to work with you again. And take that as a great compliment. And I'm thankful for them wanting that. And I appreciate the kind words they have. And I look at it and it's because of, and I go back to the individualism. I understood the mission, and the mission at any company is, let's go grow sales. Let's go make as much profit as we can. Cool. That's step one and two. The way to do it is through the people, right? So if you
Yeah.
understand the people, you can accomplish those two other things. And if you understand how to drive them and put them in the right scenario and help them and be there for them, whether that be training, whether that be just different types of support or getting the right resources around them to support them in their journey, or helping them break into a client that they've struggled to break into for the last year, like the your classic bootstrap effort. So
Yeah.
being in that same boat with them is what I learned. It took me time to learn this to get to that sales leader position, because early on, I'll be honest with you, I was a young pup. and in a Fortune 500 company, and you get your directives, and you got to
Yeah.
implement the directives. And I'm thankful I had sales individuals that would voice it to me and be like we would, have the knuckle dragouts, like, all right, what are we doing this? Are we not? But that taught me a lot in those lessons. So I
Mhm.
always, I'm going to go back to that 30, 60, 90. The more you can understand from your team, the more you can push, challenge, and before you just make your one brush stroke, of like, all right, we need to change this, the better result you'll have in the long run, and the more loyal you'll have your team as well.
Yep. And I think that's a wonderful perspective. I think I know my wife is in sales, and she's had great sales leaders and in the
Yep.
past, and she's had bad sales managers in her
Yep.
career. And there definitely is a big difference. When you're talking about a team of 70 or 80, and some people in the audience are, they might have smaller teams, some have larger teams,
Yep.
providing that level of one-on-one support, and really building that connection with them to understand how to lead them individually. How do you what do you are there systems you rely upon? How do you manage your time? Because it's one thing I hear a lot from managers is how difficult it is to really, there's only so many ride-alongs you can do in
Yep.
a day, right? So how do you manage that macro and micro challenge?
Yeah, so there's a couple. First and foremost, I would say manage your calendar. There's a lot of meetings that you can get invited to, and this is where I say manage up, right? You can do
Hmm.
1,000 different meetings all day long, and you're looking at your life and you're saying, I can't get away from my laptop because I'm in this team's meeting, yada, yada, yada. But if you can manage your calendar better and block off some times and start doing that, or telling those leaders, like, hey, I'm doing this activity, I will follow up on this, just obviously being appropriate in whatever framework you're in. Because some minor traction with a sales individual just goes a long way. I'm not
Hmm.
saying you need to be with them every month on a sales call per se, but just those spot checks. And then the tools, you could easily do any CRM. You could look at their pipeline and be like, hey, we got to talk. Like, your
Yeah.
runways, either you're doing a poor job putting information in here, or your runway is diminishing very fast. And let's sit down and let's figure it out, right? Let's go visit your customers, because sometimes even for a young individual, they might have a hard time getting past a certain hurdle, and they need a sales leader's title to help push it past. And you got to
Hmm.
know that role. You got to know, like, hey, yeah, let's use my title, let's do that, and we'll get there. Or let's use my past relationship and push past that hurdle and see what's going on. And then you start connecting, your individuals to those other leaders at your clients.
Hmm.
I'm trying to think. Obviously, bookings is another, tool that you could look at. Like, hey, you haven't booked anything in a while. What are you
Hmm.
doing? Are you staying busy? Things okay at home? And then just like, I mean, I look at it, I had sales individuals. There's one guy that comes to mind. Every Tuesday and every Thursday, I knew where he was. He wasn't in the office. That was his day where he turned his computer off and actually went and saw the customers. And to
Okay.
me, that was okay. I knew I wasn't
Mhm.
going to get an answer from him that day. So I knew, I was like, all right, he'll get to me tomorrow, but that's fine. He's doing this. That's more important, because it keeps that relevance. The biggest struggle for any salesperson, in my opinion, is how do you stay relevant? How do you stay relevant enough to keep visiting, to keep going back? And this is
Mhm.
where that book and street smart balance really comes into play. Are you personable enough where they want to hang out with you? Are you a
Uh-huh.
people individual, like, yeah, I'll grab lunch with you, you're always a fun time? Or do you understand their pain points to, help provide solutions to them, whether that be technical or not? So just understanding the customer's pain points really is, how you stay relevant, and having that street smart to be enjoyable to be around, because no one wants to have a quiet, awkward lunch with someone. Yeah, that's my
Right.
last one with that person, so I'll get my own lunch, don't worry.
I love that part about staying relevant because do you find yourself reminding your team to stay curious about their customers? And is that part of it, is just constantly having them thinking about that customer's needs, whether they're an existing customer or prospect, or is it just something that the is just part of their routine? I mean, how do you keep them in that mindset?
Yeah, I love what you said. Staying curious. I don't think I've used that before, but something that I see, especially young sales individuals get caught up in is their inbox. Oh my
Hmm.
God, I got to respond to this right away. Oh man, I got 30 emails just this morning and I gotta, get on top of it. And yes, there is a balance to that. You gotta filter through, like, okay, I can handle that later on. All right, I can do that later. Because like if you get too caught up in that, you're missing the point. And that's sort of what I try to point out with some of the salespeople. At the end of the day, as a sales individual, you're essentially paid to make friends. And you can't make friends replying to the inbox, right?
Right.
And your friends, your time to make friends is, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. for most clients, right? So if I'm sitting at my desk, or if I'm sitting at my, home desk and I'm just cranking out proposals, doing that, are you really making friends or are you not? So it's a delicate balance, and this is where it goes back to, either you're a morning person or you're a night person. Like you have to either have I mentioned the sales individual I had that Tuesdays and Thursdays don't he ain't responding to squat. He's out there
Uh-huh.
hitting the pavement, talking with his customers, and I love it. Or, maybe you're the person that goes and hits all your customers, in the morning and then spends your afternoon working away. So it's
Hmm.
it's it's really, how do you as an individual find the balance to get the people activity. And for a young salesperson, activity is probably the
Hmm.
best thing that you could ever do. I've always told young sales individuals, like, don't look at the number, pay attention to your activity. How many customers did you see today? Who'd you talk to today? Because that's just moving the ball down the field, right? Just sort of that
Yeah.
classic football analysis. How do you get to the red zone? And yeah, so if you get too caught up in the minutia of your inbox, then you're missing the point of you're here to make friends and build relationships and network. And all of those things help your probability go up. So you have a tough conversion rate. Well, if you did these activities, you might have, feedback, you might get some better insight, better earlier understanding, brought onto the job sooner rather than waiting till, oh, hey, we need a fourth number. Can you give me a number? So
Hmm.
all of those activities will help really start improving your hit rate.
Yeah, and I think a lot of young salespeople, and actually, veterans as well, they can get trapped in that email cycle where maybe it's predictable, it's safe,
Yeah.
and they feel like they're busy, but it's busy work. And it reminds me of, I saw an interview with, Mr. Wonderful from
Yeah. Yeah.
what's
Shark
it,
Tank.
Shark Tank. And he was talking about, I didn't realize it, but I guess he had worked with Steve Jobs years ago. And he talked about how Jobs had this uncanny ability to separate signal from noise. And, no, there's so much noise that we all have to deal with. And email is as noisy as it gets,
Oh,
right? You
yeah.
can be on it all day if you chose to. But Steve Jobs was able to identify the three things that if he got those three things done, it would have the biggest impact on whatever he was pursuing. And he was incredibly skilled and focused at just really kind of taking out all the noise and only focusing on signal at any time. And then he said the only person he said is better at it is Elon Musk, which has got to be the case.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
I believe
I
it.
don't see how Elon Musk does what he does, but he's just hyper focused on signal. And I think there's probably a lot of us who could bear to focus on a little bit more signal because we all
I,
get trapped in the noise. But well, hey, you know what? As we wrap up here, this has been a great conversation, Diego, and thank you again for
yeah.
joining. I'd love to kind of wrap up with what would be your advice to a young sales leader, or what would be your advice to a new sales manager who would probably like to evolve into a sales leader?
Yeah.
And what would be the simplest advice that you could give to that new sales manager as he or she embarks on their new career?
There's a couple of paths I think down this, because you get some of those that turn into, grew from the team into the sales leader or into the sales manager. I mean, for that individual, I would tell them, let go. You're not Michael Jordan anymore. You're Phil Jackson. So how do you
Mhm.
create the next MJ and Scotty and so forth? And then the other thing, I'm just going to keep using the Phil Jackson reference because, I just love the classic Bulls. But knowing your players, when you think about it, if you watched, was it The Last Dance? Phil Jackson does one thing, and I don't think people realize it, but the individualism that he treats each individual on that team.
Mhm.
He doesn't need to push Jordan as much. He needs to lighten Jordan so the team works with Jordan, right?
Yep.
He needs to let Dennis Rodman go blow off his steam doing whatever that guy wants to do, right? So, and then, he needs to, increase the, Scotty's importance. Like, hey, you're important. Like, this is how this works. And the end goal, the mission is that trophy. And look how many trophies they won, how many
Yep.
championships they were in, and the records that they set. So I would say to any young sales manager trying to get into that leader position, in converting to the leader, I should say, is know your team. It's easy to say know your team, but it's really hard to actually spend the time and really develop that relationship to know your team. It's time
That's great.
consuming, but it pays in the long run.
That's great. And I love the Phil Jackson. He also had to do it with Kobe and Shaq. Remember
Right?
managing those two egos. That was a big
And
one.
Dwayne Wade and Shaq, like,
Yeah. Right.
but he mastered it because he understood how to unlock those individuals and the
Hmm.
same common goal. Let's go
Yeah.
championship.
I love it. All right. Well, Diego, thanks again.
Yeah,
And we'll have to do it. We'll have to do another episode soon.
I would love to. I look
All
forward to
right,
it.
man. Appreciate it. Take
Thank you.
care.